Hello and welcome back to my reading of The Hobbit on Roleplay Riot. We are on the fifth part. Let's begin. I don't understand, said Thorin, and Bilbo felt like he would have liked to say the same. The explanation did not seem to explain. Your grandfather, said the wizard slowly and grimly, gave the map to his son for safety before he went to the mines of Moria. Your father went away to try his luck with the map after your grandfather was killed. And lots of adventures of a most unpleasant sort he had, but he never got near the mountain. How he got there I don't know, but I found him a prisoner in the dungeons of the necromancer. Whatever were you doing there? Said Thorin, with a shudder, and all the dwarves shivered. Never you mind. I was finding things out as usual, and a nasty, dangerous business it was. Even I, Gandalf, only just escaped. I tried to save your father, but it was too late. He was witless and wandering. He had forgotten almost everything, except the map and the key. We have long ago paid the goblins of Moria, said Thorin. We must give a thought to the necromancer. Don't be absurd. He is an enemy far beyond the powers of all the dwarves put together. If they could all be collected from all the four corners of the world. The one thing your father wished was for his son to read the map and use the key. The dragon and the mountain are more than big enough tasks for you. Hear, hear, said Bilbo, and accidentally said it out loud. Hear what? They all said, turning suddenly towards him, and he was so flustered that he answered, Hear what I've got to say. What's that? They asked. Well, I think that you ought to go to the east and have a look around. After all, there is the side door, and dragons must sleep sometimes, I suppose. If you sit on the doorstep long enough, I dare say you will think of something. And, well, don't you know, I think we have talked long enough for one night, if you see what I mean. I will give you all a good breakfast before you go. Before we go, I suppose you mean, said Thorin. Aren't you the burglar? And isn't sitting on the doorstep your job, not to speak of getting in the door? But I agree about bed and breakfast. I like 6 eggs with my ham when starting a journey, fried, not poached, and mind you don't break 'em. After all the others had ordered their breakfast without so much as a please, which very much annoyed Bilbo, they all got up. The Hobbit had to find room for them all, and filled all his spare rooms and made beds on chairs and sofas before he got them all stowed and went to his own very little bed, very tired and not altogether happy. One thing he did make up his mind about was not to bother get up very early and cook everybody else's wretched breakfast. The tookishness was wearing off, and he was now quite sure that he wanted to go on this journey in the morning. As he lay in bed, he could hear Thorin still humming to himself in the best bedroom next to him. Far over the misty mountains so cold, to dungeons deep and caverns old, we must away ere break of day to find our long forgotten gold. Bilbo went to sleep with that in his ears, and it gave him very uncomfortable dreams. It was long after the break of day when he woke up. End of Chapter 1. Chapter 2, Roast Mutton. Up jumped Bilbo, and putting on his dressing gown, went out to the dining room. There he saw nobody, but all the signs of a large and hurried breakfast. There was a fearful mess in the room, and piles of unwashed crocks in the kitchen. Nearly every pot and pan he possessed seems to have been used. The washing up was so dismally real that Bilbo was forced to believe the party last night before had not been part of his bad dreams, and as he had rather hoped. Indeed, he was really relieved after all to think that they had gone without him, and without bothering to wake him up. But never a thank you, he thought. And yet, in a way, he could not help but feel just a trifle disappointed. This feeling surprised him. "Don't be a fool, Bilbo Baggins," he said to himself, "thinking of dragons and all that outlandish nonsense at your age." So he put on an apron, lit fires, boiled water, and washed up. Then he had a nice little breakfast in the kitchen before turning out the dining room. By that time the sun was shining, and the front door was open, letting in a warm spring breeze. Bilbo began to whistle loudly and to forget about the night before. In fact, he was just sitting down to a nice second breakfast in the dining room by the open window when in walked Gandalf. "My dear fellow," he said, "whenever are you going to come? What about an early start, and here you're having breakfast, or whatever you call it, at 10:30? They left their message because they could not wait." "What message?" said poor Mr. Baggins, all in a fluster. "Great elephants," said Gandalf. "You are not at all yourself this morning. You have never dusted the mantelpiece." "What has that got to do with it? I've had enough to do with washing up for 14. "If you had dusted the mantelpiece, you would have found this just under the clock," said Gandalf, handing Bilbo a note, written, of course, in his own notepaper. This is what it read: "Thorin and company, to burglar Bilbo, greeting. For your hospitality, our sincerest thanks, and for your offer of professional assistance, our grateful acceptance. Terms: cash on delivery, up to and not exceeding 1/14 total profits, if any. All traveling expenses guaranteed in any event. Funeral expenses to be defrayed by us or our representatives if the occasion arises and the matter is not otherwise arranged for. Thinking it unnecessary to disturb your esteemed repose, we have proceeded in advance to make requisite preparations and shall await your respected person at the Green Dragon Inn, Baywater, at 11 a.m. sharp. Trusting that you will be punctual, we have the honor to remain yours deeply, Thorin and Company." "That leaves you just 10 minutes. You'll have to run," said Gandalf. "But," said Bilbo. "No time for it," said the wizard. "But," said Bilbo again. "No time for that either. Off you go." To the end of his days, Bilbo would never remember how he found himself outside without a hat, a walking stick, or any money or anything that he usually took when he went out, leaving his second breakfast half finished, quite unwashed up, pushing his keys into Gandalf's hands, and running as fast as his furry feet could carry him down the lane, past the green mill, across the water, and then for a mile or more. Very puffed he was when he got to Bywater just on the stroke of 11, and found he had come without a pocket handkerchief. "Bravo!" said Balin, who was standing at the inn door looking out for him. Just then all the others came around the corner of the road from the village. They were on ponies, and each pony was slung about with all kinds of baggages, packages, parcels, and paraphernalia. There was a very small pony, apparently for Bilbo. "Up you two get, and off we go," said Thorin. "I am awfully sorry," said Bilbo, "but I have come without a hat. I have left my pocket handkerchief behind, and I haven't got any money. I didn't get your note until 10:45 to be precise." "Don't be precise," said Dwalin, "and don't worry. You will have to manage without pocket handkerchiefs and a good many other things before you get to the journey's end. As for a hat, I have a spare hood and cloak in my luggage." That's how it all came to start. Jogging off from the inn one fine morning just before May on laden ponies, and Bilbo wearing a dark green hood, a little weather-stained, and a dark green cloak borrowed from Dwalin. They were too large for him, and he looked rather comic. What his father Bungo would have thought of him, I daren't think. His only comfort was he couldn't be mistaken for a dwarf, as he had no beard. They had not been riding very long when he came up to Gandalf. When up came Gandalf, very splendid on a white horse. He had brought a lot of pocket handkerchiefs and Bilbo's pipe and tobacco. So after the party went along very merrily, they told stories or sang songs as they rode forward all day, except of course when they stopped for meals. They didn't come quite as often as Bilbo would have liked them, but they still began to feel that adventures were not so bad after all. At first, they passed through Hobbit lands, a wild, respectable country inhabited by decent folk, with good roads, an inn or two, and now and then a dwarf or a farmer ambling on business. Then they came to lands where people spoke strangely, and sang songs Bilbo had never heard before. Now they had gone far into the lone lands, where there were no people left, no inns, and the roads grew steadily worse. Not far ahead were dreary hills rising higher and higher, dark with trees. On some of them were old castles with an evil look, as if they had been built by wicked people. Everything seemed gloomy, for the weather that day had taken a nasty turn. Mostly it had been good, as May can be, even in merry tales. But now it was cold and wet. In the lone lands they had been obliged to camp when they could, but at least it had been dry. "To think it will soon be June," grumbled Bilbo as he splashed along behind the others in a very muddy track. It was after tea time, it was pouring with rain, and it had been all day. His hood was dripping into his eyes, his cloak was full of water, the pony was tired and stumbling on stones, the others were too grumpy to talk. "And I'm sure the rain has got into the dry clothes and into the food bags," thought Bilbo. "Bother burgling and everything to do with it. I wish I was home in my nice hole by the fire with the kettle just beginning to sing." It was not the last time he would wish that. Still, the dwarves jogged on, never turning around or taking any notice of the hobbit. Somewhere behind the gray clouds the sun must have gone down, for it began to get dark, and they went into the deep valley with a river at the bottom. Wind got up, and the willows along the banks bent and sighed. Fortunately, the road went over an ancient stone bridge, for the river was swollen with rains, came rushing down the hills and mountains in the north. It was nearly night when they had crossed over. The wind broke up the gray clouds, and a wandering moon appeared above the hills between the flying rags. Then they stopped, and Thorin muttered something about supper. "And what shall we do to get a dry patch to sleep on?" Not until then did they notice that Gandalf was missing. So far he had come all the way with them, never saying if he was going on the adventure or merely keeping them company for a while. He had eaten most, talked most, and laughed most, but now he was simply not there at all. "Just when a wizard would have been most useful too," groaned Dori and Nori, who shared the hobbits' views of regular meals, plenty and often. They decided in the end that they would have to camp where they were. They moved to a clump of trees, and though it was drier under them, the wind shook the rain off the leaves, and drip, drip was most annoying. Also, the mischief seemed to have gotten into the fire. Dwarves can make a fire almost anywhere out of almost anything, wind or no wind, but they could not do it that night. Not even with Owen and Glowin, who were especially good at it. Then one of the ponies took a fright at nothing and bolted. He got into the river before they could catch him, and before they could get him out, Feely and Keely were nearly drowned, and all the luggage they carried was washed away off after him. Of course, it was mostly food, and there was mighty little left for supper, and less for breakfast. And that's where we'll start part 5, and if you want to hear what happens about roast muttons, we'll cover that on the next one in part 6. Thank you so much for watching Role Play Riot.